One of the reasons we practice mindfulness and meditation is because this mind is a very tricky thing. We miss so much because we're not mindful. We're not very aware. We don't observe cause and effect in our own mind half the time. We might say we're deluded. So what brings us out of delusion is the Dhamma. We just chanted that. It brings the mind up. The delusion tends to bring the mind down to suffering, to, you might say, to a lower level. So we practice meditation and mindfulness regularly, and not just meditating, but in all postures and activities we try to bring up more awareness so that we can know ourselves, know our mind better. And the reason we become stressed is because we've accumulated what we call anusaya, kilesa, mental defilements that kind of lie waiting in our consciousness. You might even say asleep in our consciousness, or deeply ingrained in our consciousness, and half the time they're not yet stirring or manifesting. Because if the conditions are not right, they'll just sit there. It's like a potential for suffering is there, based on our past experience, what we've said and done, what's happened to us. But they'll only emerge when the conditions are right. That's why practicing non-delusion, mindfulness, clear comprehension is so important. Because it's only through practicing non-delusion that we'll get to see these anusaya, kilesas, mental defilements, deeply embedded in our own stream of consciousness. It's a bit like muddy water. When you have muddy water, you can't see what's in there. It's like our pond here behind this hall. Actually has a lot of fish in it, but you rarely see them because often the water is quite muddy from the forest, the leaves and the soil. So only when the fish come to the surface, and it's usually in the sunlight reveals them. Our mind is like that. So only when the conditions are right, something happens, something triggers you or prompts you, then these anusaya kilesas start bubbling up, stirring up. Even then, conditions change so quickly. Sometimes you're just starting to get angry or worried or afraid, or some kind of desire is stirred, but then it goes quiet again. You're only vaguely aware, perhaps. Other times you get the full emerging of some kilesa. As we all know, suddenly you're angry, or suddenly you're full of desire, greed, full of fear. It can come up very quickly when the conditions are just right. We often have this thought, oh, where did that come from? Why do I feel this way? Why is this emotion so strong? Well, the causes and conditions were laying there, the seeds were there already, it's just we didn't know. We're deluded. They're covered over. And whether we're conscious of it or not, often we spend a lot of our time trying to get comfortable in our life so that we don't have to face these mental defilements suddenly emerging. So we're always trying to get rid of things we don't like, make our world comfortable. Something like a house is a good example of that. Most people are trying to get some place to live. When you're young, maybe you don't have enough money to buy a house. So obviously you might have parents, you can live with them, and then you go out maybe in rent somewhere, but you never feel quite happy because you're paying money to someone else and you don't own it and you can't necessarily change it the way you want. So most people dream of getting their own house, and they get a house, maybe one day buy it with a mortgage, and then they start thinking, how can I improve this? Do a bit there, do a bit here, renovate, paint it, decorate it, add a bit on, take a bit away, and then they start thinking, I want a different house, better location, bigger, better, and on it goes. We're always trying to make our house better to suit ourselves so that we don't have to feel some of these mental defilements bothering us, frustrations, discomfort, unhappiness in one way or another. And that's only one small part of life, but it is a good example of how we're constantly adjusting and trying to make things better so we feel more comfortable. So nothing bothers us. So we've got our own house, and we don't have to pay anyone else for it. And then we're grumpy because we've got to pay rent, or not rent, tax, or land tax, or council rates, or something. Or we're still paying your mortgage, so we're not happy there. But we've got a place, once you've got your own place, well, you can say, this is my home, my secure place. And you can do what you want inside, no one knows, no one can push you around. So you've got a certain level of happiness. But then when you go out into the world and you're back with all these insecurities and uncertainties, so then these anusaya kilesas are easily stirred up when you leave your home. Even animals are the same. If you ever have a mouse in your house, one thing is they're reminding you that even your own house is not your house. You have to share it with other things. But a mouse will endlessly spend its time trying to make its nest just nice, just right. Warm, secure, far away from danger, good place to have babies. Spend all night scratching around, poking around, adding bits to their nest, making it bigger, better. No different from humans, really. Birds, the same. They build a nest, they're constantly adding to it, poking around, looking for more fluff. Someone was telling me how the birds, even they land on a cow or a horse, and they'll scrape a bit of the hair off the cow's back and then take it to line their nest. The cow doesn't mind because maybe they take a few bugs away with it, or excess hair or fur, and then the bird gets a nice warm fluffy nest. But they're endlessly trying to improve their nest. Life is like that. We're trying to always make things the way we like, the way we want, get away from pain, difficulty, insecurity. But we don't see it, we don't notice maybe. A lot of it is unconscious. When you meditate, you start to bring your mind to pay attention to your own body and mind in the present moment, from moment to moment, and you notice things. You may notice these anusayas, these underlying habits or underlying tendencies of mind. You start noticing them. It's like the sunlight on the water, and you see the fish for the first time, you realize what's there. Oh, this tendency to get angry, greed, delusion, worry, fear. Start noticing these things. So a wise person, maybe at that point they say, I should really practice more of this mindfulness. I should really start rooting out some of these cravings and attachments because they cause me suffering. But if wisdom is not so sharp, maybe we say, I should just make my house better, my nest better, to get away from them. Then I won't have to see all this uncertainty and discomfort in my mind, all the painful memories and emotions that can come up. I won't have to face them. So for Buddhist monks, one of the first things you have to learn is how to be on your own. Come into the monastery, you're given a kuti, a hut, in the forest, and it's one person per hut. and you're in a forest that you're unfamiliar with. When you're first in the monastery, even the way to your kuti you might forget the first few days. When I first lived in monasteries in Thailand, at first if you didn't have a torch, you literally couldn't get back to your kuti at night. You'd be bumping into trees, tripping over tree roots. You have to go and find a torch or a lantern. Here's the same, our forest is big, so just getting used to the pathways. Maybe you walk along one path for many days and then you realize there's a shortcut that you didn't know about. So just getting used to where your hut is, and then going to sleep at night, being there on your own in the day, takes some getting used to. Some people feel afraid, or nervous, or uncomfortable. They're just seeking distractions so they can never go back to their hut. They've got to seek out other people to talk to, or technology, or things to do elsewhere. They're not content enough to be on their own in their own hut. Some people can't sleep on their own in the forest. Some people have to have someone to talk to feel good, feel comfortable. That's maybe one of the first things you learn in a Buddhist forest monastery, how to be on your own, peaceful on your own, happy on your own. It doesn't mean to say you never have anything to do with other people. You do, but you've got to learn how to be at ease and peaceful on your own. Once you've learned that, then you have this great independence. Because already you'll be much more aware of yourself. Maybe you have to confront some of your attachments, the attachment to comfort that you no longer have or don't always have. Attachment to people, attachment to different things. And you also have to confront fears, nervousness. Some people can't fall asleep on their own or in the forest. They hear a sound that they're not familiar with. What's that? Lock the door, shut the window, and make sure there's no way for whatever that sound, whatever's making that sound, make sure it can't come in. It's worse in Thailand. In Australia, we make the kutis strong and insulated, and there's not much way for things to get in unless you leave the door or the window open. In Thailand, often the kutis are so simply made that there's gaps everywhere. Gaps between the floorboards, gaps between the walls, the ceiling. Plenty of gaps for creepy crawlies to come in, snakes, scorpions, centipedes, ants, mice. In Thailand, they say you haven't lived in the forest until you've been woken up by a mouse or a rat chewing your ear in the middle of the night, testing to see whether it tastes good or not. So at first it can be difficult, but that's the practice. You're learning to see what it brings up. It's a phrase you hear a lot. Go and stay in your kuti and see what it brings up, staying in the forest. Staying on your own. Maybe sometimes you go a long way from other people to see what it brings up. When we say see what it brings up, we mean anusaya kilesas, these mental defilements coming up. Imagination, fantasy, emotion, feelings, thoughts, restlessness, worry, so much can come up. Maybe, I know many monks who in their early days, sometimes they're so afraid they can't sleep at night. Not necessarily in a forest full of tigers or elephants, but just being on their own in a new and lonely place. Sometimes fear of invisible dangers like illness, things like malaria or scrub typhus, dengue fever, diseases that can come through mosquitoes. Or fear of having an accident and no one knows. Most monks, forest monks, will have had a time when the thought comes up, oh, what if I fall over and break my leg, but nobody knows? just lie here. And what if I get bitten by a snake? Nobody knows, I just have to lie here, dying. Your mind will throw up these thoughts. That's anusaya kilesa coming up. All the thoughts, what if? Sometimes based on fear, anxiety, worry. What if, what if, what if? And the rational mind says, yeah, it's quite possible. You could fall over and hurt yourself, or knock yourself out, or get bitten by a snake, or catch a disease, or a tree could fall on your head. All the things you can imagine could happen. They may even have happened to someone else. It doesn't mean to say they will happen, and just thinking like that is not going to change whether it happens or not. But it will make you very unhappy inside, very unpeaceful. And you realize, the real problem, more than the tree falling on your head or the snake biting you, is what you think about the whole thing. The worry, the nervous anxiety, the discomfort. That's the problem. Even like pain in your body, pain of tiredness, hunger, aches and pains. And the real suffering is what you think about it more than the actual pain, much of the time. So we have to practice. As they say, go off, stay in a kuti on your own, see what it brings up, and then practice. Practice the Dhamma. Bring up the mindfulness. Watch and observe. Ask questions. Is restlessness and worry helping me, making me wiser, more peaceful, making me a better person? If you bring your mind to reflect with some Dhamma, some wisdom, some mindfulness, then it should uplift you. Maybe it uplifts you to the point where you rise above that kilesa. So you may have had worry, restlessness, anger, fear, but you overcome it by facing it and seeing it as impermanent or as not self. Then your mind goes higher, uplifted by the Dhamma. Because Dhamma uplifts us. But if you don't try to practice, you don't make much effort, and that is another kind of kilesa, maybe apathy, complacency, laziness, distraction, then of course these kilesas seem very powerful and overwhelming, and it's hard to get much insight into them. Sometimes you just have to endure, and that is Dhamma, but in the beginning, endurance, it tends to be just putting up with stuff you can't let go of. So we have to practice, and so you seek out going to a kuti to walk and sit meditation, to face up to things. Sometimes we hear about teachers who have gone off to stay in cremation grounds or haunted places or lonely mountain tops or places where there's wild animals that are dangerous. But they will have practiced first, just getting used to being on their own in different situations. So they have enough mindfulness and they've trained themselves to reflect on things, to know things. Know their own mind, know the feelings, the thoughts, maybe already developed some understanding about how impermanent and changeable everything is, how unreliable these thoughts are that come up, how easily they trick us, delude us, lie to us. They've already got maybe a foundation of that practice, so then when they go after these more challenging places, they're ready. If one's not ready, then you go to the challenging place, it can really freak you out. Literally make you run away. And monks do, they run away sometimes. I knew one monk who wanted to do a retreat in a cave, totally dark cave, just to see what it's like. Silent, dark, nobody around, no activities, just there on his own. Which can be a good practice once you get into it and once you're ready for it. But he perhaps wasn't ready for it. Had so many cravings come up, he was really unpeaceful. always restless, always thinking of the things he was missing. So one of the things he missed was coffee. And the nearest house who had coffee was about 4 kilometers walk away. So one night the craving got so strong he couldn't sit still. He's walking up and down, oh, coffee, 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 I've got to get some coffee. He didn't have any. So he walked out into the night, 4 kilometers in the night, to go to a house and knock on the door. Have you got any coffee? Because he's a monk, he's sure that the people had enough faith they'd probably give him a cup of coffee. And they did. And then he went back to his cave, happy because he got what he wanted. But then the people started to criticize him behind his back and say, well, who's this monk? He's supposed to be on retreat in a cave. He can't even go without a coffee for a night. Later on, somebody felt sorry for him, so a couple went up to the cave to see him, to see if he was all right. And he was supposed to be practicing silence, so when the couple went into the cave, he was so upset, disturbing his silence, that he shouted at them out of the dark. There's this voice shouting, "Get out of here! You're disturbing my meditation." And they were so scared, they ran and falling over out of the cave. All of this is anusaya kilesa coming up. When the people are there disturbing the peace, your attachment to the idea of peace is stirred up, challenged by these people, then anger arises. When the memory of coffee and whatever highs or happiness that coffee has previously given you comes up, it leads you to walk off looking for coffee. There's different levels or intensities of kilesa. First it's just a thought, isn't it? Just a thought. Pops up or bubbles up. And then you develop that thought, but without Dhamma, without mindfulness and insight or awareness of what is wholesome and unwholesome. Just thinking, I need this, I need my coffee, or I don't want anyone disturbing me. Whatever the particular kilesa is, it might form a certain solidity in your mind because you keep thinking it over and over again. And then finally it bursts out. We've got anusaya kilesa, pariyuttana kilesa emerging up or bubbling up, and then vitikama kilesa, you actually do something based on the kilesa, based on the desire to get rid of, so you shout at the person. The desire to get hold of, you walk out looking for coffee. But if you can pause and just think of it all or look at it all with the eye of Dhamma or wisdom, panya, then you're seeing kilesa and the process, how it's stimulated, how it arises, what it does to you. So even if it is sometimes you fail, you give in to a kilesa, but it's still an opportunity to learn, isn't it? You win some, you lose some, and you learn about yourself and how you're conditioned by a kilesa. It's not that kilesa are a person, a being, a self. They're just mental states, unwholesome mental states that prompt you to think and then speak and then act in certain ways that lead on to suffering. Whereas the Dhamma, mindfulness, wisdom, patience, compassion, all the good qualities that we develop through the practice, does the opposite. Helps to quell, restrain the kilesa, helps you to have more self-control, ultimately brings you to peace, and out of the peace you get clarity, you get insight, you can let go. So we have to accept when you practice mindfulness, even if you're just meditating at home, sometimes it brings up stuff that you didn't see before, we didn't notice before. Often people say, oh, I have all these thoughts that I never knew I had or never knew were there. They probably were there, you just missed them. Because of delusion, because we're so good at distracting ourselves, making our nest comfortable, we miss so much. When you start meditating, you're going in the opposite direction. You're starting to practice restraint, mindfulness, awareness. You're looking back at your mind, so you miss less and you see more. So you start to catch some of these mental defilements. And at first they're not easy to be with. Sometimes we're not proud or happy with what we see. Maybe we see some of our worst qualities. But the only way is to press on with developing mindfulness and patiently keep reflecting on them, questioning, investigating, and then letting go. It's like any kind of medical procedure. The thing you're trying to get rid of is something that's gone wrong in the body. If it's anything like a surgery where you open up the body, it doesn't look nice. Various growths or injuries, and they always look ugly. But in order to free that patient, that person from the growth, the injury, the whatever's wrong, well, you have to face it. You have to open up, fix it in some way or other, cut it out or sew something together or change something around. And once it's been done, then you can close up the body, and then hopefully that person becomes free of that problem. And the mind is the same, it's just mental, it's not physical. You have to look and get to know kilesa before you can abandon it. If you never see it, well, you never let go of it because you don't know it's there. So that's why sometimes we go off and stay in a kuti on our own, go off to a cremation ground or a place where there's a corpse. It's unlikely you might see a human corpse these days, but you might see a dead kangaroo or a dead deer in the forest. Sometimes it's good to go and meditate, sit next to it. If it's the summer, it may even end up being full of worms. You can sit next to a corpse full of worms. It's very unpleasant, but you're contemplating your own attachment to your own body, desire for life, desire for beauty. It's a chance to contemplate that. Or just being in the forest on your own, especially if you go outdoors, walking meditation or sitting in the open, there'll be sounds you can't always explain. What is that sound? So you contemplate the fear that it brings up. Fear, the worry, nervousness. What is that? Is there a problem? Is there a threat? Am I in trouble? Sometimes we have to push ourselves a bit in order to see kilesa. Then you've got a chance to let go of it. Otherwise you're like the patient, who knows they've got something wrong but they never want to face the doctor, never want to go and do the surgery. So whatever the problem is just gets worse and worse and worse because they're not facing up to it. Maybe they die quickly. Sometimes we have to be brave in life, face things that are difficult to face, look at things that are difficult to look at. But where you get your bravery from, again, is from the Dhamma, from wisdom. You see, if I can become mindful of this, there's a chance I can abandon it, and I'll be better off, I'll be happier. So you get motivated, you get some strength of mind, you get brave. Even just committing to sit meditation for an hour, walk meditation for an hour, makes you braver, more courageous. This word virya, the Buddha used a lot. It's one of the most commonly used words that the Buddha spoke, virya, which means not just effort or energy in the practice, it also means courageous or even heroic effort. In Thai, means vira means hero. You're a hero when you bring up the kind of effort that faces kilesas, makes you mindful of a kilesa, and then work out a way to abandon it. Requires some heroic or courageous effort. If you spend all your life lining your nest, making it comfortable, where you'll never face these kilesas, you'll never see them. Viryena dukkhamaceti. It's a famous phrase many of the forest ajahns use. Dukkha or suffering is overcome by effort, virya, heroic effort. It's the only way. You can't fake it and get to nibbana. You can't just tell people you've done it. Your mind is not free just by telling other people or hoping, or wishing. You also have to practice. It's just the way it is. So don't be afraid to push yourself sometimes. Sit a bit longer than you would normally like to. Walk a bit longer. Stay awake later than you would normally like to. Get up earlier than you would normally like to. You push yourself a bit. Go and sit in a quiet place, far away from the comforts that you're used to. See what it does to you. It may bring up discomfort, unhappiness, nervousness, whatever, but look at that. What is it? It's mostly just negative thinking that you're producing yourself, maybe accompanied by some unpleasant feeling. But it arises, it passes away. There's not much to it. Maybe you have an insight, you have a breakthrough. Fear is just another mental state accompanied by an unpleasant feeling. It can be very powerful, can come up very quickly, but in the end, it's impermanent, it's not self. It's just another mental state that arises, passes away. All of the kilesas are like that. Boredom, excitement, liking and disliking, wanting, not wanting, happiness, suffering. When you can see them all as mental states not to be clung to be known but not clung to, not attached to, then you've got like one eye on Nibbana. That's the eye of Dhamma, you've got one eye on the Dhamma. So maybe I'll leave you with these thoughts tonight, and we'll finish in a moment.